In our Delaware education segment, we look at parent opt-out. It's a phrase few in Delaware had even heard of before this year, and yet over the past few months, there has been a broiling debate about whether parents should be able to pull their children out of the new statewide standardized test known as Smarter Balance. Here to discuss the issue with me is Representative John Kowalko, author of an opt-out bill that is currently working its way through the legislature. I'm also joined by Teri Quinn Gray, president of the State Board of Education and an opt-out opponent. Representative Kowalko, I wanted to start with you. You've said before in a letter to the editor published in the News Journal that this bill that you have authored is specifically about a parent's right to opt out of the Smarter Balance standardized assessment. I wanted to know, if that right is so important, why circumscribe it to just Smarter Balance? Why not include other assessments if that right is so fundamental?
Well, quite frankly, the Smarter Balance assessment, the test itself, has not been proven to be anything effective as far as measuring a child's progress. So when we insist that a child take a test such as that, which has no proven reason for being imposed, and it does take up a lot of the time of the child and puts a lot of stress on those children. When we say this in particular is not a voluntary choice, but has to be done, has to be taken, then we have to have a vehicle where the parents can sit down with their child and decide whether or not they feel that's in the best interest of their child. We do have opt-out things that are statewide. We have over 1,200 homes that homeschool. They've opted out of the entire system. So the other tests are basically a determination by the teachers and by the schools to see where the progress is that the children are doing. Those, the routine quizzes, the routine tests, and the SATs and the APs are actually a very valuable tool that the children take, and they're not forced to take those to move on.
If this is about parents' rights, if it's about them having the option, why just say we're only going to give you the option on this one test that we have deemed to be worse than the others? Why not say it's your choice, you're the parent, if you want to opt out of end of term assessments or Measure B assessments or whatever those things are, we're going to give you that right. It seems it seems narrow to just say, well, we believe in parents' rights, but only in this one case.
Well, it may be very significantly motivated by the fact that this one case, this Smarter Balance assessment, has been crafted and has been imposed upon the education system under the guise of some kind of reform mechanism, under the guise of being beneficial. And that's the statement that's been made, that is somehow benefits students to take this test. It's not even longitudinal. It doesn't come to the end of the year. It doesn't measure what it purports to measure. Therefore, it is, in some cases, and this is not a bill to encourage people to opt out, believe me. It is not any way, shape, or form a bill to encourage or discourage parents into opting out. What it is saying that you have the right, when you see something that is not useful to your child, that is also can be harmful to your child in the case of a heavy dose of stress, so to speak, that you have the right to do what's in the best interest of that child. And that right is not precluded by any federal law. So it's the state's right, I think, to codify.
Well, I get it. We have to move on from this, but it seems like if it's about the parent's prerogative to protect them from something harmful, it should apply to all tests, not just to one test. But I want to move on. Dr. Quinn Gray, I hear two things coming from this current administration. One is that we've got too much testing and it's harmful and it may be repetitive and redundant. But the other saying, well, you can't opt your kid out of the test. How can you reconcile those two things? It seems almost cruel to say, well, we know these tests can be bad, but you're not allowed to remove your child from them or harm them or shield them from harmful effects. How can you reconcile those two positions?
Yeah, the reconciliation is that it is about the parent's right to know if what the instruction is in the classroom and what the kids are learning relative to our rigorous college standards, if we're actually making the mark with having students learn and grow. That's a parent's right and need to know that. And what comes with that are multiple measures. You have a state assessment, you have multiple measures and assessments at the school level and at the district level. And what we're saying is that you need all of those. There's no one answer, no one assessment that helps us understand if a student is growing, if a student is learning. Now, when you want to focus on just this one test, for instance, this is the only one of those that is internationally benchmarked across not only the nation, but also with NAEP and PISA and other tests. And so what we're saying is our students deserve to understand across the board a consistent level of rigor in instruction, and how do they fare relative to other students across the country.
This brings me to an interesting point. We have one side of this debate saying this is a great test, the other side saying it's a terrible test. This test has just been given for the first time. I think the testing window closed a week ago. How can either of you be so sure that this is a bad or a good test?
So
I'll start with
Well, and I'll answer that. Yeah. I've never said that this is a bad test. I have my feelings, my reservations.
Okay.
But the opt-out bill is not about this test condemning it or validating it. And it certainly has influenced the fact that this test is an unproven measure. Therefore, and there are existing...
Every test is unproven until you give it, though.
Exactly. So now why are we insisting that these children are going to be given an unfair test that's going to be used in a judgmental way to measure effectiveness of teachers, effectiveness of schools, effectiveness of students to learn, be able to learn without measuring their abilities and what the needs are to move forward? There is existing tests that are benchmarked, that have been existing. That NAEP is one of them.
Yeah,
so when we look at these type of things, I ask the question, the next question to follow, what is the purpose of this test? And it has been stated by this administration, by Ms. Gray also, that this test is one way to validate the Common Core curriculum progress. There is the crux of the issue if you want to talk about this test particularly.
Well, let's get to that. We've had diagnostic tests for a long time, and I think a lot of people's main concern is that these tests are being used to punish, being used to allocate resources to some schools and away from others, to make staffing decisions. Why not just have a diagnostic test? Why have a test that has all these high stakes attached to it?
Yeah, so, first let me just clarify that our specific state test, Smarter Balance, is a test that has been administered to 4 million students across the country. And there are several students, several states, several districts that are involved in that. And so to say that it has not been tested or has not been used is not inappropriate. It is the first rollout officially for us in Delaware, with this being, and we've piloted here as well, with a limited number of students. But we do have all of the rigor behind understanding of those 4 million test pilots and those students. So want to make sure that that's clear. Now, when it comes to your question around, I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
Well, I guess the question is, why not just use a diagnostic test that tells you sort of what's going on? You get a nice little idea, some nice numbers, but it isn't used as a stick and carrot.
Absolutely. And so, there are many ways one could use the data for this test. And the primary reason for the test is to understand the level of instruction and learning in the classroom. And clear enough, when we use that data, right, it can be used to make decisions about how to fund or provide supports or enhancements for students, and that's exactly what it should be used to do. Now, this is, for me, not at all a priority in terms of how you use it for teacher evaluations. That is not the priority of the board when it comes to this state assessment. It is all about the students learning and growing over time.
But I think one way you could at least drive that home is saying we're not going to use it for teacher evaluation or assessment. We're just going to use it as a diagnostic tool. It's just going to be a way for parents to say, this is where your child's at.
That's a different conversation, and that is not the reason that I'm standing here on behalf of the board to talk about the context of this test for teacher evaluation. That is not a priority for us in this conversation. It's about how is it used to measure learning growth and that embedded instruction. And we know this test is not imperfect because no test is perfect. It has its imperfections. And again, why do we rely on multiple measures? Is that we know that we use multiple measures to converge on what we do understand about students, because no one test can do it.
We do have to wrap up. We could talk about this for 30 minutes, but there's so much interesting stuff here. It has become clearly the dominant issue right now in education in Delaware. And I think it's good that at least we're talking about it, because there's been testing for a long time, and at least we're having the conversation. You can get more education coverage from us at newsworks.org/Delaware.